Welcome to the Motherhood Mentor Podcast. I'm Becca, a holistic life coach, mom of two, wife, and business owner. This is a podcast where we will have conversations and coaching around all things strategy and healing that supports both who you are and what you do. So grab your iced coffee or whatever weird health beverage you are currently into, and let's do the damn thing. Welcome to today's episode of the Motherhood Mentor Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about conflict. Woohoo! Favorite topic. Anyone else? No? Man, conflict can tend to make me feel so uncomfortable in my body, whether that's conflict with myself, right? Because we have self-conflict, or whether that's conflict with someone else, especially conflict with my husband or my kids or my family or friends, or even conflicts within my business. And today I wanted to come and share some somatic tools around conflict that I think are really going to support you in navigating the conflicts in your own life. So first of all, let's just kind of talk a little bit about conflict and how close together conflict and complexity are. So conflict and complexity just are. They always will be. There's no amount of healing or work you can do or growth that will help you not have conflict in your life. This is really important to understand. The goal of regenerative conflict, of having conflict that alchemizes or goes in and actually makes something better, almost even think of composting conflict. How can we take this thing that maybe doesn't necessarily feel super good, but conflict actually, when we learn how to maturely approach it, when we learn how to approach conflict with regenerative energy, with hope, with goodness, conflict can actually be a gift. Conflict is an opportunity to create even more intimacy, trust, and depth, especially when we're approaching it with intention. So when it comes to conflict, a lot of times underneath the conflict is not necessarily two people fighting against. Picture two fists pushing against each other, fighting for what they want, right? Conflict is not always a fight against. It's having two different needs, preferences, or boundaries. It's two different systems existing, and your boundaries, expectations, ideals, needs, desires are different than the ones of someone else, or even within yourself, right? How many times have you wanted something, but there's a little part of you that's scared of getting it? You really want this thing, but there's another part of you that doesn't want that thing, right? That is conflict. The other part of conflict is just noticing that there's different attachment styles, different nervous systems. There's having the same goal with someone else, but then having completely different approaches. Now, one of the things that I think has made conflict and boundaries so difficult is our culture doesn't love slowing down and making room for the nuance of complexity as a good thing. Understanding that there are always going to be gray areas, multiple truths. There can be conditional needs, boundaries, and preferences existing at the same time. And neither one of those needs or preferences needs to be right or wrong. They both can have a lot of validity. They both can have a lot of, solid centered ground to stand on. There doesn't always need to be a villain and a victim in conflict. Sometimes both things are really good. They're just going about it in different ways or different speeds. And so understanding that conflict is unavoidable. It always happens when there's two different parts that are wanting to create more intimacy, right? Because intimacy requires us to grow closer to other people. And when we're growing close to other people, the closer you get, the more vulnerability there is, the more impact there is, the more intimacy, the more closeness, the more conflict you're going to feel and is going to be required of you. So many of us have not yet learned the art of feeling bad. And when I say feeling bad, I mean having a discomfort in your body either emotionally or mentally, physically, or relationally, especially when we're looking at conflict. So many of us have not learned how to feel uncomfortable in relationship and not make it mean that the sky is falling. Understanding that conflict and rupture is not only normal, it's actually healthy. It's actually just the normal process and product of two different things wanting to coexist in a way that's actually mutually beneficial to both of them in meeting their needs and meeting their desires. Conflict is helping us to understand the patterns that we're already bringing so that we can be a little bit more intentional with them. So one of the things that I think is really going to help you is to slow down and recognize this truth. Conflict is happening in your animal body before it's happening in your logical mind. So many of us try to intellectualize our feelings, our experiences for ourselves. And then we get into relationship with other people, whether that is romantic relationship or your relationship to your kids, the relationship in your business. We think we are so mindful and self-aware, except for the fact that we live in these animal bodies, and the animal body is almost always what is going to be activated when you are with someone else. And when I say your animal body, I mean quite literally that you are a mammal wired for survival. And the reality is that you have had a nurtured and natured response to activation from the time you were a baby. And you learned in your home environment, you learned through your parents' relationship, you learned through your family system, you learned through your church. What do we do around conflict? Do we yell and explode? Does my parent disappear? Does my parent expect me to walk on thin ice and eggshells and try to get everything right so that I don't piss them off, so that I don't tip their trigger? But wait, that's an impossible game. In my household, do we talk about hard, heavy emotions, or is it only okay in my household to be good, healthy, happy, and blessed? Do we talk about the hard things, or do we brush them under the rug? Do we talk about the systems that are at play, the relational dynamics, the power dynamics that happen in our household? Am I allowed to have my own thoughts and feelings? What happens when there is rupture? What happens when there's a fight? Do we talk about it after? Do both parties get to feel heard, seen, and loved? Is there repair that happens when my parent makes a mistake? When I make a mistake, are we allowed to repair things? Or do we pretend like it never happened? Or do we passive aggressively hold it over the other person's head? The way that your animal body learned how to handle conflict was from a child's perspective. And that's really important to remember, that you were a child, because when you are a child, it is really hard in your family upbringing. And, here's the thing. You didn't have to have massive, big T traumas of abuse or intense things in order to have these conditioned tendencies show up. This is like an everybody thing, not just in those intense scenarios where people are having big traumas. This is also just happening if you grew up in your everyday household with loving parents who were probably doing the best. Guess what? They had a way that they dealt with relational rupture. They had a way that they dealt with conflict. And your small animal body had to learn, okay, how do I survive this? How do I stay in belonging and conflict? Do I need to fawn and people please and make sure that I am self-regulating and self-controlling in order to never make my parents upset, because it's actually my job to regulate my parents' emotions? Did I learn that when we are angry, we explode and we take that anger and we take it out on other people? But wait, I'm not allowed to do that, but my parent is. Did you learn that emotions aren't really a thing, and that we only do logic, we only do systems and structures, and we stay away from that, gushy stuff? Your animal body learned these conditioned tendencies. This is just the way that your body, your soma, your animal body unconsciously responds, especially to conflict, especially to when there's activation relationally. So there's this automatic body response to stress. Think of it as natural and normal as sneezing, as swatting away a fly, as like there's this fly buzzing around your head and you just swat it away with your hand, right? Or there's just these patterns ingrained in us. So here are the patterns that typically show up for people. Towards, which is when you get close for safety, you're overly nice, you're appeasing, you're people pleasing, you're fawning, you're going towards that person. So there's conflict between you and your spouse, you and your partner, you and your kid, you and your friend. And you might have different tendencies depending on the environment, but there's one that your body likely learned and kind of got stuck in as your only pattern. And I'll talk more about that here in a minute, about the movement of conditioned tendencies. These patterns are not bad, but so many of us have gotten stuck in them, and we can feel that stuckness of like, why am I still people pleasing? Why do I tell people yes when what I mean is no? Why do I always tell people to like F off when I really need them close and comforting me and being near me? It's because of your conditioned tendency. You got stuck in one pattern of conflict. So there's this movement of towards, my energy is leaning forward. All of my energy of attention is going towards you and what you want, what you need. I need you to be safe for me to feel safe. So there's often like a disassociation that comes before this. There's a freeze of I'm no longer feeling myself, and now I'm attuned towards you, your patterns, your movements, your emotions, so that I can fix this, right? This is the way that you're approaching conflict. Then there's the pattern of away. You lean back, if you will, like almost unsteadily. You move back, and sometimes it's really quick and sometimes it's really slow, but you fade into the background for safety. You avoid the conflict. You see that there's a pattern or a trigger for conflict, and instead of moving towards the conflict, you move away from it. Sometimes moving away from it means that you disassociate from your body. So you go into mental intellect instead of feeling your body, because you don't like that discomfort of feeling the conflict, the uncomfy things in your body. So you move away into your head, or you move away emotionally. You kind of do this thing where you're there, but you're not really there anymore. You're just kind of appeasing the other person, but not in a way that's leaning towards them. It's just leaning away and letting them kind of do what they want. Now, there's also the pattern of moving against. This is moving towards, but if you think of, I like to think of this as like you're moving towards the conflict, but there's a lot more of like a fist. Moving towards is like a graspy, holding, helping, fixing energy. Moving against is a little bit more, there's a fight to it, right? There's a fight for safety. There's a defensiveness. There's a challenging. There is again, a disassociation from self, but instead of you're disassociating from your needs and desires, and you're moving against the force outside of you. And then there's the movement of down. And what I mean by down is that this often happens because the conflict feels like too much for you. And that doesn't, just because it feels too much for you, this is really important to understand with conflict. Just because it feels like it's too much for you doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have capacity for it. It's just that you have not practiced the skill and the capacity of being with yourself when you are activated. And we're going to talk about that today. But this movement pattern of this automatic conditioned tendency of moving down is that when there is conflict, you just disassociate and freeze. You go into logic, you go into distraction, you leave the room. You're not there. So when we have these movement patterns, It's like you're standing there and all of a sudden something grabs you. It grabs your attention. It grabs your emotion. It grabs you and it knocks you off center. Think of that as like if you're standing and I'm standing next to you and you and I are having conflict, is there a like, and I knock you, there's a grab. Something in me grabs you. When something grabs you, do you move against it, but towards it? Do you move towards it, but with like oh my gosh, I need to fix it and I need to make it better and I need to help? Or does something grab you and you instantly run the other way? Does something grab you and you instantly shut down because you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this right now? When that's happening, something is grabbing us. It's bringing our energy and our attention out of ourselves. And so before we can ever deal with that outside force, before we take action, we can bring ourselves back into this choosing. When I'm working with clients, I love this. There was a statement in the Embody Lab where I was trained for somatics of choosing matters more than doing. If you can bring yourself back to the choice. So, right, when there's conflict, something grabs you. Center yourself literally in your body. This isn't complex. I think that's what's so powerful about somatics is that it's so easy that so many people are unwilling to do it because we think that healing is so complex, but something grabs you literally in your body. Center yourself. So if you're leaning towards someone and you're people pleasing, the first thing is noticing, but the second thing is centering back, literally leaning back. If you're sitting down, lean back into your chair into a relaxed posture. Feel your backbone and your spine, vertebra by vertebra by vertebra, center down. Feel the weight and the steadiness and the strength in your lower body. If something grabs you and you move with a fight and you feel that fist, you feel that arm, you feel that moving towards them, bring that energy back into your core, into who you are, into your values, into the part of you that is centered and curious and compassionate, the part of you that is present. Because so often these conditioned tendencies, these reactions, they're coming from a younger, immature part of us. And so it's not the most healthy way to figure out how to solve this conflict with ourselves or our partner or in our business. It's coming from an immaturity. It's coming from a reactive impulsivity. And yes, sometimes there's a fly that you just need to swat away. But a lot of times in this conflict, we are stuck in, oh, all I ever do is fawn. But if I can come back to center, feel myself, literally being able to feel my body, feel my breath, feel my lungs, feel my hips, feel the air around me, feel what day it is, what time it is, how old I am, feel my values. What do I actually want in this relationship? And then from that centered place, now I can face the conflict. Now I can connect back first to myself. But now that I'm a self, guess what? Now I can connect back to you. Now I can actually see you with curiosity and compassion and problem solving, because now I'm not in my animal brain that's saying fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I'm no longer in this animal brain that is literally just acting upon impulse, that's acting upon what it knows. This is one of the hardest parts, I think, about trauma healing, is that we don't realize that the pattern in and of itself is not problematic. This is the way that you survived, and it worked. It worked because it got you here. But we come to a time in our healing where we look around and we realize the way that I'm responding to my life, the way that I'm responding to my partner, the way that I'm responding to my kids, this doesn't work for me. This isn't effective. It's not that it's bad. It's not that I'm a bad human for feeling this or acting this way. It's that this isn't it. This isn't how I want to respond. We feel like we've lost our choice and that our trauma responses, our conditioned tendencies are choosing for us. So when you're in relationship, when you're a mom who's yelling at your kid and you're like, how do I stop yelling at my kid? I'm like, well, first of all, we're going to look at your conditioned tendencies. We're going to look at what your nervous system is doing, because regulating your nervous system is not saying, oh, all you're ever going to be is centered. All I'm ever going to be is calm and happy and compassionate. No, you are going to get triggered. You are going to have moments of massive discomfort where your body, your animal body responds for you. But can you start witnessing and becoming conscious of these unconscious patterns so that you can reconnect back to yourself? Because once you're reconnected back to yourself, now you can see the other person. Now you can feel the other person. Now, from a centered, grounded place, you can face the conflict with embodied moves and practices like boundaries, like communication, capacity building. You can connect even when you're in conflict. You can learn how to resolve conflict, not only through communication, but connection. You can actually take this conflict and use it as a space that creates more life, more joy, more freedom. That rub, it's there for a reason. It's not bad. You cannot, I'm going to say this a million times, you cannot outrun your humanity, and you never were supposed to. Your nervous system healing is not about becoming so regulated that you never get triggered, that you never have discomfort, that you aren't ever fawning or freezing or disassociating or fighting or fleeing in ways that like actually don't make sense to you. It's being able to be with those responses so that they're no longer these like kind of like unwatched toddlers. Now they have a parent there to take care of them, to create safety in a way that like doesn't just work now, it works long term. You can change the conditioned tendency in the pattern when you become aware of it, when you have access to it. When you bypass this part of understanding what's going on in your body, when you bypass this relating to your nervous system, you're not regulating your nervous system, you're gaslighting it. You're not regulating your nervous system. You are using toxic positivity to repress and restrict the very healthy energy of your body's movement. You need the energy to move. You need the energy of fight. You need the energy to move against things in your life. That's boundaries. You need the energy and the permission in your life to be able to move towards people. It's not bad to move towards people in conflict and be loving and appeasing and listen to their needs and meet their needs and be kind and helpful. It's just, can you do that without disassociating from you? Can you be grounded while you move forward? Can you be grounded and centered while you're angry and moving against something and pushing it away and fighting it and meeting it with a fist? Can you be centered when you're moving away from conflict, that you realize this isn't mine to handle? This is your bullshit, not mine. This is how we transform conflict in our lives. So often when we're avoiding conflict, when we're avoiding boundaries, there is a reality of grief that we're avoiding, right? We avoid the boundary, we avoid the conflict because we don't want to feel and face the loss of reality. The actual reality that they are not who we wanted them or needed them to be. They are just who they are. They are not this idealistic version of our parent. They're just there. They're not that idealistic version of your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Your kid is not this idealistic version of who you thought they would be or should be. They are who they are. And that is not always a pretty picture. Humanity is linked with suffering. Humanity, we cannot outrun the fact that it hurts to be human sometimes. And when we stop trying to outrun it, it's so much simpler. It's so much easier. We finally have the capacity to be with it. We avoid the sensations and emotions of grief and anger and disappointment and self-responsibility and discomfort of the reality that we want things that other people don't want for us. We need things that other people can't meet. And then we are led to this place of sovereignty, of recognizing that we no longer have to be something that we're not. And we can stop expecting other people to be or do things that they are not capable or not interested in doing. What is it that they bring to the table? Because if they're serving bread and you're hoping to get fruit and you show up and you're just pissed off that the table doesn't have fruit, that conflict is never going to work. What is going to work is if you go to that table and be like, they're serving bread. Do I like bread? Do I want bread? There's a conflict of interest because actually I'm gluten-free and I can't eat that bread. And then they're like, okay, well, this is the bread I have. Conflict is being able to be centered. Are you actively choosing the way that you respond to conflict? When something grabs at you, when it knocks you off your center, you can build the capacity to recenter. So grab, center, face. Something grabs you, it knocks you off, it makes you go forward, or it knocks you back, or it creates this anger that moves against. Recenter. Support yourself. Find something outside of you to support you so that you can come back to center. And then once you're centered, then once you're grounded, now you face it. Now you face that conflict, that boundary, that activation from a place of choosing. Thank you so much for being here today. I really hope that this podcast gave you some insight into the way that you handle your conflict with your friends, with your family. If you enjoyed this podcast, will you please take a moment, hit the follow button so that you make sure that you always get the latest episodes. There's some really good ones coming up. So make sure you hit that follow button. And then will you do me a favor and leave a review? This helps other people find this podcast that will hopefully be very life-giving and supportive to them. I hope you have an amazing day. Take up audacious space in this life, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for hanging out today on the Motherhood Mentor podcast. If you loved today's episode, share it with a friend or tag me in your stories on Instagram so that we can connect. Take up audacious space in your life, and I'll see you next time.